it was such a big part of my life. And I guess the fact that I experienced those things, and that when I had that ego death experience, I realized how common a lot of that was. I am concerned that there are a lot of people like me that don't realize they're like me yet, because I was very sure that transition was the right thing for me at the time, right?
We're all watching stuff, and I see grown men with pigtails dressing like 6-year-olds saying, I'm going into the women's bathroom. And I'm thinking, well, my niece is going to be in that bathroom. I don't think that's right. For me, females are telling me they don't want us in there. So I honor that and I respect that. And I also just I'm okay with using a single stall bathroom, even though they're fewer and farther in between. It's like, okay, well, at least I know I'm not going to upset men or women. I just have my own space.
I've been thinking a lot about how we can help kids in this situation, because none of them walk into it expecting to be radicalized into an ideology.
I want kids to be safe. I don't want pedophilia normalized, and I think that's where we're headed.
I don't want more people to suffer with what I went through, and we're seeing it every single day.
So intersex is it's an umbrella term for conditions that affect the development of the reproductive tract. And I was just really offended to see someone sort of speaking on my behalf and saying things that I fundamentally disagreed with. And I felt like really that I was being used as a prop.
But with transphobia, anything that goes outside of the ideology is transphobic, and the ideology in and of itself is incredibly convoluted, incredibly disassociated from reality. So it's very easy to be transphobic.
Even throughout my transition, I always knew that I couldn't get a period. I couldn't give birth. It was rooted in pragmatism and reality. The fact that I can't even say that on TikTok without being, knocked down. People can't say that on YouTube without having their stuff pulled. It's crazy. How did we get so far in so few years? And it really just makes me wonder what agenda is behind all this thing.
And I feel totally different today from what I felt back then. When I started to really learn more and more about this, and I started to evolve and awaken, I was like, this stuff ain't real. This stuff can't be real. People just can't. How many people could be born wrong? It's like everybody's born the wrong sex. No. There's something going on that's triggering this.
I think it's very, very short-termist. I think it's particularly repugnant as well, the way that the trans lobby have managed to infiltrate places like the Royal College of Psychiatrists and the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, whereby they are branding counselling for trans people that's anything other than affirmative as being a conversion therapy when it's not.
As I started kind of seeing the errors in the own way that I was thinking throughout my transition, but also at that point, I started seeing some of the flaws with the trans ideology as a whole. And so I started just being more aware of it. And I saw a lot of parts of the community that I started thinking were really toxic and really messed up.
I'm thinking of it as an epidemic of sorts is what's happened now.
It's the conformity, which we talk so much about diversity, but what these groups imposes is conformity. To say, this is what it means to be trans, this is what we do, this is how you fit into this. And the moment anybody steps out and says, well, perhaps there's another way to be trans than this, that's when we learn just how strong that drive for conformity is.
I think the fact that transgender is ideological in and of itself is why any transgression against that ideology is seen as transphobic. Trans people are so intolerant. They're censoring radical feminists, and they're censoring gender critical people. But then they'll, like you said, turn around and do the same, act the exact same way with racism or misogyny.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I was a very, very different person at 16 than I was at 20, than I was at 25, than I am now. And I think that's insane, that someone who is 16, your hormones are all over the place, you don't know jack shit, you're practically insane, you're still learning who you are, you're going through this massive period of self-discovery, and you're supposed to be able to know with certainty that you are going to continue to identify this way for the rest of your life. I don't know how you could think any 16-year-old is capable of that.
I needed to detransition my delusions first. My delusion was that I was a woman, that I could become a woman, that a doctor could turn me into one. That's delusional.
After the anorexia kind of cult, I started getting into the gender ideology cult. Like, it's very, very celebrated, almost like worshipped.
It's funny because years later, like more recently, all of the people that were in my life that are upset with me for sharing my detransition story and joining Gays Against Groomers, they're all saying, well, you finally found the cult you always wanted to join. And it's just like, well, I don't think you get it. We are the cult.
It was just more as I got sucked into it and more like devoted to the identity, almost religious way. That's when I started to have problems with my body, because I just became so obsessed with the idea of me as a guy that my breasts and my voice and just everything about me that was female became problematic. The trans thing was so caught up in this identity thing, and it was something that I like kind of worshipped in a way. And I realized how religious the thinking is. I was like, this isn't good. Like, this isn't healthy. I don't think that this is what God wanted me to do.
Trans women are women. Repeat after me. Trans women are women. You know, if you're hanging out in Reddit and people are controlling what you are allowed to read and what you're allowed to think, and you have to, you know, it's literally like being in a cult. Once you break the cult's hold on you, and you start teaching yourself what went wrong, then you start getting better.
Cult survivors have this thing they call popping. When you leave the cult, when reality like sticks back into place and you realize everything you've been living is like kind of fake. I definitely had that when it finally like clicked for me. That was kind of when things popped for me.
But when I saw what I can only really describe as very cult-like aspects to it, I kind of backed off. I was like, okay, I'm not going to get involved in any of that. Because that's the thing, like, people will call me transphobic for some of my views. I have a lot of transsexual friends, and they agree with me, but they don't go public and get involved with us because they recognise what their words, not mine, they recognise how much of a cult the trans community is becoming.
That led to, do I want to spend the rest of my life reliant on a medical industry? And the regret was starting to hit like full force.
When I started to feel regret for what I had done to my body, it was just like, you know, you were given a perfectly healthy female body. Now you don't because of surgery and synthetic hormones. Like,
Yeah, I mean, it was just like everything was just kind of crumbling. You know, the realization that none of this had helped my mental health like I was promised.
Some of the hardest like messages that I've gotten from people that I would consider friends in my life have been them telling me I'm attacking them by just sharing my own experience. And they are the ones that are being the meanest towards me about this whole stuff.
And I'm getting so much hate from transgender community. It's like I'm trying to help these people with my story, but I'm being ridiculed and I'm being gaslit.
There was one friend of mine online who transitioned and then detransitioned, and I viewed it as triggering, so I just blocked her on Tumblr. Everything about detransitioning I saw as triggering because it made me doubt myself, and so I just blocked it out of my view.
Stuff going on in the Tavistock clinic, like in what was happening there. And then I think a statement about the Florida Board of Medicine. This was before I had even detransitioned, at least fully committed to detransitioning. When that person saw that and sent me an entire text that just was like, and it said, I can't talk to you anymore. This is what you're posting is hateful, and rhetoric like this is essentially like you're going to cause kids to kill themselves if we keep spreading those beliefs around. That was a great wake up call to, oh my God, what is wrong with this community?
And a lot of my old friends who were trans identified, I've lost a lot of them, which is interesting because it's just one facet of like my life and my beliefs and my identity. But yet somehow it becomes this all encompassing, like you're no longer trustworthy kind of thing.
And also, like, when I detransitioned, a lot of my friends, like, they took it personally. And also, once you detransition, it doesn't mean you don't want to transition anymore. It means you've consciously made the decision that transition will not fix your problems, usually. Yeah, so I'm not really connected with those people anymore. Actually, after I became gender critical, I was still trans for almost 2 years. I just want to say, that is when I got the most hate on in my entire journey. The most hate I got was when I was a gender critical trans person. And I got like rape threats and death threats and all that kind of stuff, like from trans people. Like they would say, like, you're a traitor, you're a TERF, whatever.
When people tell me, oh, you weren't trans, because, you know, that's what happens with a lot of detransitioners. You know, they tell detransitioners that they were never ever transgender, that they don't count, you know? It's really pathetic when we tell people, those that detransition, that they were never trans. That's like telling an ex-drug addict or an ex-alcoholic or an ex-porn addict that they were never that way.
It's not said because people are scared to say it. Because if you say it, you're transphobic. And if you say it, you're being a bigot and you're being a gatekeeper, which is saying, like, they call anybody that says that you should, like, we were talking earlier about, like, needing to go to gender therapy in order to, you know, get on hormones. I think that's key and really important. And people will say, well, that's gatekeeping. Why are you stopping people from getting hormones? Why are you being a roadblocker? If you're trans yourself, why would you do that? And I'm like, because I don't want to see people make the wrong decision.
And when I did transition and shared my thoughts about stuff, they were like, oh, you're a bad trans person, you're a true scum.
But the majority of people think of this as something that is god-awfully wrong.
There's a lot of these young kids that are growing up on the internet. They're in their 20s and 30s now. They're telling me I don't know anything about being trans. They tell me I don't have a right to speak for trans people because I'm not really trans. And it's like, well, honey, I transitioned, you're 15. Like,
I kind of take issue with the idea that, like, talking about me or other detransitioners or representing our viewpoint necessarily is an argument. We exist and we're an emerging population, and I think that's newsworthy.
Something that I really disagree with is that there's real trans people and then there's people who get confused. And I find it very hard to believe that I can identify as trans for 5 years and I was never really trans, or someone can go and get genital reconstruction surgery, but then they were never really trans. I don't agree with that.
Detransitioners in general are seen as, like, you weren't ever really trans, or you weren't ever really sure about your transition. And it's the sense that, oh, well, you were never really one of us, or you never really experienced what we experience. And I feel like that's a really toxic way to view the situation.
Sometimes people will say, you know, you're a liar, you're a fake, you're not really a detransitioner, you're just pretending to be. It's like, oh, okay. Me then.
I couldn't cry on T. That sucked. I like crying. Crying is the best thing ever, dude. I love crying. It's like, you know, okay, so like the best thing that I realized too was with this whole thing was that I have to feel my feelings. I can't just be like, I don't need you right now, go away, because that doesn't work. And so crying is this, like, it kind of sucks in the moment, but then afterwards you're like, I'm refreshed. I feel like it's like, you know, you unclogged a gutter or something. Yeah. Like, stuff is actually flowing. You know, you feel good. I don't know. I really like crying.
Once you strip away that testosterone, you can just, like, cry at the drop of a hat.
I would cry at the drop of a hat.
While I was on the testosterone, it was like there was just a block. I actually would spend time, like, trying to make myself cry because I felt like I had tears built up and I just, like, nothing could make me cry.
I don't know, again, I don't know if it's to do with the testosterone, I'm just kind of blaming it on it, but I know that while I was on it, I found it really, really difficult to cry, which I used to find was a really good way to just get everything out. But I couldn't really experience extreme emotion while I was on it. And then after coming off testosterone, after about 2 months, I was like, you know, if I dropped a carton of milk, I would burst into tears. It's like, oh.
And my shoulders grew a lot bigger. They don't really align with my hips anymore, which causes me pain and balance. And yeah, it does cause soreness and just general clumsiness.
I'm like, I physically don't understand or see how I could go back to living as a woman. I'd buzz my head because the hairline recession was bothering me, and I was tired of people telling me that, like, just come off hormones and, like, you know, your body is just going to magically revert back and, like, you could be a woman in society. And I made the video out of spite, being like, no, look at me. Like, realistically speaking, am I going to, you know, go back to looking like I was before? No, because I've been on this stuff for almost 5 years. This is reality for me.
Sex reassignment surgery is a sewing project. They take parts of the glands and connect it to the scrotum, and parts of the shaft and connect it to the urethra. So there's, like, all these different pieces, like a crazy, just put together. That's not the way it's designed to be.
And when you no longer have your male genitals the ways they were supposed to be, now it's, like, inverted inside of me. Not get attention to my genitals that have been destroyed. My penis is permanently gone, like, inverted and changed. It's a piece of colon that they took at some point to do colon vaginoplasty. is right now inflamed inside of my body. So I may need at least another surgery, but at least to remove that part of colon tissue that's been like taken from my bowels and shoved inside of me. And that's another surgery like that I'm very afraid of. And those implants also have to come out, and I'm really scared what my body gonna look like.
At this point, I had also started developing some health issues. I was like sore all the time. Like my joints just were sore. I would get like little random bursts of pelvic pain. Some stuff is probably just here to stay forever. And the tough part is that we don't quite know which part's which.
You can have vaginal atrophy and all this kind of stuff. So a lot of trans men end up experiencing extreme pain or even, I don't know, all sorts of other complications that in the end they need to have hysterectomies. I did not take it as seriously as I should have. Everything was very happy, queer, all that kind of stuff.
I want them to realize that they are the victim. They think they're winning something. They think they're doing something grand. But in the long term, as they get older, that honeymoon stage is going to go away. The health issues are going to come in. And then when they look back and they're going to go, wow, I left a trail of disaster.
I view gender reassignment surgery as a euphemism. I think we have to describe it as what it is. It is extremely brutal.
I'm experiencing sexual dysfunction at the age of 18. That's something that women usually go through when they're in their 40s to 50s. How is I supposed to know?
Having seen that and having my own experience, I kind of really woke up to the fact that, like, no, I don't think kids can consent to this, especially since, like, the desistance and the detransition numbers are rising. I don't know. I really worry because it's all been normalized, especially with that young kid who transitioned, was on Lupron, cross-sex hormones at like 13, all for what? So they could be a porn star. I don't think a 16-year-old who's starting to transition can even comprehend that.
I wonder if it would have gone away faster, because I do feel like the fact that I focused on it more and like identified with it further sort of made it worse in some ways. I didn't know that at the time, but like in retrospect, I think that happened.
Therapists that gave me, letters for the surgeries, they never reached out to be like, hey, are you alive still? Are you okay? The surgeons that worked on me, they don't care, they moved on. And as far as I know, they're still practicing medicine. So I would like some accountability.
The VA has kind of dumped me. I recently talked to them, reached out and said, I'm going to need some help, getting through this again. You've got my diagnosis wrong here. You shouldn't be carrying me as gender dysphoria, when in reality, this is an autogynephilia problem, and we need to get that changed. And they didn't seem very receptive to that.
There's not a lot of, if any, medical professionals that are all too interested in helping detransitioners. And so you essentially learn things like you learn that from the stories of other detransitioners who did that and said, don't do that. That's not a good idea.
They're not doing the follow-ups that they're supposed to be doing.
I was terrified of getting pregnant because I was 16. And to the point where after being on T for a little bit, I almost had an hysterectomy at 18/19, and thank God that did not go through. But it was something suggested by my doctor as like the next step. That even though I wasn't a suicide risk at any of these points, it's a little worm in the back of your head that when you're told this over and over again by the community, as if if you don't transition, you might want to kill yourself. Especially as a young person who's confused and scared and doesn't know what's good, that gets in the back of your head to the point where it's like, okay, I'm not suicidal now, but if I don't go through with this, will I be? This is what is presented as what will save you. When it is presented as transition or death, that is especially for someone in a vulnerable state. Of course, you're gonna pick the one that isn't death.
At the beginning, they told my parents, like, your child will be at risk of suicide if you don't affirm her identity. Basically just propaganda. But it wasn't until after I started the treatments that I started feeling like committing suicide.
I met a couple that one of them would be one of the first trans women I knew to commit suicide later on. I didn't really think too far in the future. I was already starting to lose friends to suicide in the queer political scene that I knew of, that I was in.
I think probably within a month on estrogen, I had my first interaction with suicidal ideation, even like a suicidal attempts. When I brought that up with my doctor, they were like, we just need to make sure your levels are good and you'll be fine.
A lot of transitions do flame out and people do commit suicide. And I kind of pictured it as a landing zone for people like me.
People always say, like, oh, if you get hormones and surgery, you won't be suicidal anymore. Like, I literally know a trans man who got surgery and went on hormones and then killed himself. Like, it doesn't fix your problems.
And the view is always like, yeah, but if you don't transition them, they'll commit suicide. And the really interesting thing is this always comes from trans people who transitioned as adults. So, like, work that one out. You are here, you're an adult, you transitioned as an adult, you did not kill yourself.
If you look at the majority of trans people, and I'm not saying that there's no successful or happy trans people, there might be a few out there, but the majority of trans people end up losing everything from their family to their health. Majority of trans women have died off. They've either killed themselves, gotten killed, or gotten sick, cancer, heart attacks, because of the use of synthetic hormones.
Post-operative transsexuals, so people who had been through sexual reassignment, the suicide attempt rate and the actual suicide rate was considerably higher compared to the general population. So the idea that we need to allow people to transition as soon as possible, because if we don't, they're all going to kill themselves. The follow-up study that we have indicates that the suicide rate is still phenomenally high.
So the first detransition subreddit was actually called r-detransition. The current one is r-detrans. Yeah, so it was founded by a trans woman who didn't call herself a detransitioner, but she did regret her SRS, sexual reassignment surgery. And so she made this community for people to talk about regret and detransition and all this kind of stuff. And very sadly, unfortunately, she ended up committing suicide. And within just a few hours of this suicide becoming public knowledge, there was some very large trans identifying users of Reddit within hours became the new moderators of the detransition subreddit. And then as moderators, they started deleting all of the posts that they didn't like. A group of powerful activists who had taken over the subreddit and were systemically deleting everything. So that's what I mean by they want to get rid of detransitioners and our stories and our voices.
And I think that a lot of people have been sold this lie that like transition is necessary to survive. And if you don't transition, you're going to kill yourself or your children are going to kill yourself, etc. And I think that's like a very destructive way to view it, because you are basically putting the person in this position where they're fragile. And if they don't do this thing, they're going to be destroyed. When the reality is you are not fragile. You are actually very resilient, and you will survive with or without transition. And you will survive whether or not people gender you correctly or not.
And the surgeons who are removing the breast tissue from young women, they should be put away in prison.
Often these trans youth groups are led by older trans people. But the problem is, if you're unsure about your gender, or if you want to transition and you go to these kinds of groups, you immediately see somebody that did what you want to do. So it's like not even a question of, can I do it? It's like, oh, they're trans, I want to be trans, there I go. Like, this is my path, they're going to help me, that's it. Like, so there's no step of questioning, really.
Okay, here's how we deal with the problem. We ensure that nobody who has transitioned, but anybody who has transitioned is automatically barred from working with adults and children, especially children who are gender dysphoric or confused about their bodily sex.
It was a little bit after I had started feeling really uncomfortable in my body and had started sort of independently thinking like, I really don't want to be a girl. I wish I was born a guy. But then I came across him and I was like, that's something that exists. Like, I can do that. And that's what's going on with me, I thought. His experience matched up so well with how I was feeling. And so I definitely latched onto that, I think, as like, this is what's up with me. This is why I'm so distressed.
And that those individuals who have encouraged children to transition and or operated on children with, I would really like to see them rounded up and put in jail and made to be responsible for what is actually a completely regressive and utterly inhuman experimentation on young people.
So I say to those people, what is it that you have to hide? If you're so, certain that what you have stands on its own, then why don't you let the opposition speak? Why don't you let people be the judge of things? Why do you have to try to destroy people's lives? Let us live again. Let us try to regain what we lost, and let us be able to be a hand for those that feel that this life is not right for them. Let us be that educator. Let us be that support system. Don't try to destroy us. You've already done enough damage.
I just say, this is a hill I'm ready to die on, because I've been on the inside. I know where it's headed. It's definitely headed in a direction, and I don't want it to go there. So by stepping back and saying, I abhor this, no, I'm not gonna, I don't believe in trans age any more than I believe in trans race, more than I believe in transgender.
So when I stopped the SSRI of, I don't want to be a permanent patient. I want to learn how to deal with this I want to learn how to deal with this in reality, and I want to face it head on, even if it's going to be difficult. Something I could have been taught to do and helped through at a much, much younger age before being medicalized at all.
I feel like I would say all of the same things that my parents told me, which is that you'll grow out of this. I mean, I don't even think they said that because they knew I wouldn't respond well to that. But that is what happened. I think one of the things that my dad said that kind of stuck with me was basically just that the periods of being 18 to 25, that time in your life, you will change more than any other time in your life. That is the most psychologically turbulent time that you will have. And you will change profoundly as a person.
I know that a lot of the stuff that I say sounds a bit strong. A lot of people view it as very, very confrontational. But I'm not saying it to be mean. I've lived this life. I'm being honest.
I would be like, trust your mom when she says that this is normal. That's the main thing. Don't give so much attention to what other people think about you. That's probably the main thing. I had so much focus on how other people perceived me, and it was not healthy at all. You are allowed to take walks. Take walks. Don't just only, I wouldn't recommend that people only stay in their houses and don't get sunlight, because that's very bad for the human body. It doesn't have to be I think a big thing, but I really feel like getting outside to some extent is really important.
I'm me, and I'm happy with that. And I've kind of let go of needing all of that societal validation for looking a certain way or performing something within a certain norm. I'm no longer letting other people build my self-image for me. But I like to think that my 16-year-old self would be proud of me just for finally feeling okay. I was, even at 16, pretty much all the way up until I was still in a rather vulnerable place with everything. And I think the level of feeling okay and just kind of confident in myself now that I have is something that I don't even think my 16-year-old self could ever see possible for me. And I like to think younger me would be happy too. And I do think that there is a genuine need to start to show that, hey, it does get better. Live your life in a way that is based in reality and have hope in that, because things do get better. They get so much better in ways that, if you're still clinging to a trans identity, you maybe don't even know are possible yet.